voice through nature. Reverend Brown met and shadowed Reverend Harrington during the course of her pastoral care and counseling class at Bethel Seminary of the East. It's been through this relationship that she's experienced ever-present encouragement and support to fill her dream of finishing school and pursuing a career in counseling. Reverend Harrington is her academic mentor at Bethel, but she's been and continues to be so much more than that. I quote Reverend Brown, "She's the counselor for counselors, and that is why I love her, and thank God for her connection to me." My dear friend, Donnamarie, introduced me to her dear friend, Sheree, and I'm joy-filled and honored to be able to introduce her to you, Reverend Sheree Harrington.
Amen. Hallelujah.
Praise the Lord.
Praise the Lord.
Thank you. It's a blessing and an honor to be here this afternoon. And when Donnamarie had mentioned that she was going to be installed today, she said, "Oh, I'm going to be installed on August 21st. Can you come?" I'm like, "Yeah, I could be there." I thought I would be sitting out there. She said, "No, you're going to preach." I said, "I've been to your church. I heard you preach. You're going to preach."
My Lord.
Okay, I'm going to preach. The other thing is, this, Donnamarie, whether you know it or not, this is poetic justice. When I was ordained in 2005, it was a 90-degree day with 90% humidity. And I said to those participating, "You're going to wear your robes." Poetic justice. It's hot up there, so short word, but a deep one.
Come on now.
Come with the word.
Teach me.
So it's been said that desperate measures call for desperate times. Desperate times call for desperate measures. And we can all agree that we are living in desperate times. People do crazy things out of desperation. People will get involved in unsafe situations and circumstances out of desperation. People will engage in substance abuse and alcoholism out of desperation. And people will commit acts of mayhem and murder out of desperation. And nations are struggling to figure out how to counter the negative effects of these desperate acts, which are bringing nations to their knees. And there are times throughout history when God raises someone up to help people to change direction. To help them see that the circumstances that they're in, the desperation, is because of their failure to be willing to submit to the one who can change desperation into deliverance. And so in our scripture this afternoon, we're going to read about such a situation where God raised up an individual to bring a nation back to himself. And our text this afternoon is Judges chapter 4, verses 1 through 24. For those of you who have your Bibles or electronic devices, feel free to follow along. I am reading from the New International Version. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, now that Ehud was dead. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Sisera, the commander of his army, was based in Harosheth Hagoyim. Because he had 900 chariots fitted with iron and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years, they cried to the Lord for help. Now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes decided. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River and give him into your hands." Barak said to her, "If you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go." "Certainly I will go with you," said Deborah. "But because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. There Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali, and 10,000 men went up under his command. Deborah also went up with him. Now Heber, the Kenite, had left the other Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, Moses' brother-in-law, and pitched his tent at the great tree in Zaananim near Kadesh. When they told Sisera that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera summoned from Harosheth Hagoyim to the Kishon River all his men and his 900 chariots fitted with iron. Then Deborah said to Barak, "Go, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you?" So Barak went down Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and army by the sword, and Sisera got down from his chariot and fled on foot. Barak pursued the chariots and army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim, and all Sisera's troops fell by the sword. Not a man was left. Sisera, meanwhile, fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because there was an alliance between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the family of Heber the Kenite. Jael went to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right in. Don't be afraid." So he entered her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. "I'm thirsty," he said. "Please give me some water." She opened a skin of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him up. "Stand in the doorway of the tent," he told her. "If someone comes by and asks you, 'Is anyone in there?' say no." But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. She drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. Just then Barak came in pursuit of Sisera, and Jael went out to meet him. "Come," she said, "I will show you the man you're looking for." So he went in with her, and there lay Sisera with the tent peg through his temple, dead. On that day God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, before the Israelites, and the hand of the Israelites pressed harder and harder against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they had destroyed him. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Israel was in a state of desperation. They had allowed themselves to slip into a state of disobedience after Joshua had successfully led them into the promised land. Sadly, after Joshua's death, Israel lost their spiritual commitment and their motivation and plunged into darkness. Israel tried to do things their own way. And in fact, the Bible tells us that in that day, everyone sought to do fit in their own eyes. Whenever we try to control our lives without God, we find ourselves in a place of struggle, of desperation, and confusion. And so it was for the Israelites, who seemed to have fallen into this ongoing, perpetual state of falling into the hands of different oppressors because of their disobedience and their complacency. However, with every subjugation, God raised up someone to deliver them from their oppressors. You see, the heart and soul of the book of Judges is about heroes. Men and women whom God raised up to deliver Israel from its oppressors. They were not perfect, but they were submissive to God, and He was able to use them to accomplish His purposes. And so our text this afternoon, we read about one such person. Her name was Deborah. Now, we're told that Deborah wasn't a superwoman. In fact, she was a wife. She was also a prophet whose primary role was to deliver a word to the people, to obey God. And by the way, she was leading Israel at that time. In other words, she was a judge. Now, I don't know about you, but I have heard a number of different stories about why Deborah couldn't be a judge. Some would say, well, Deborah was kind of sort of a judge, but she wasn't on par with her male counterparts. But that's not true. Deborah was on par with Moses himself, and there was no higher authority at that time and in that day than to be a judge. And others have said, unfortunately, God had to raise up a woman because there was no men willing to step up to the plate. But that's not true either, because the text doesn't give either of these explanations for why Deborah was a judge. The simple reality is God chose Deborah not because of her gender, but because, like her male counterpart, she was committed to obeying God and leading His people in living a holy and righteous life before Him. God was not in heaven sitting back wringing his hands saying, oh no, I've run out of male judges. What am I going to do? Guess I'll have to raise me some woman. And Deborah's husband, Lapidoth, wasn't standing off in the shadows saying, okay, Deborah, don't you embarrass me before my fellow Jews. And quoting to her Ephesians 5:22 about being submissive and going home and doing what she's supposed to do, take care of her stuff. No, Lapidoth knew that God had raised up Deborah for such a time as this. So Deborah calls for Barak in verse 6. And watch this. She tells him that it is God, not herself, that is commanding him to go. She says, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you. Go take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River and give him into your hands. God has the whole plan and strategy mapped out. All Barak has to do is follow directions. But we notice Barak refuses to go if Deborah won't go with him. And at this point, somebody might jump up and say, see, told you. God had to raise up a woman because there's a weak-willed man who wouldn't step up to the plate. But Barak's refusal had nothing to do with Deborah's gender or her abilities, but rather his own failure to trust in the Lord. And by the way, if you think Barak was a weak-willed man, go to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32, and you will see his name listed among the heroes of the faith. So Deborah agrees to go with Barak, but she warns him that because he acted the way that he did, God is going to work through a woman of faith to deliver the people from oppression. And at this point, we might assume that that woman is going to be Deborah herself, because after all, she had all the right qualifications. But Deborah does not point to herself. She says God is going to work through a yet unnamed woman to deliver the Israelites from their oppression. Now, the name Deborah translated means bee. And if you think about the characteristics of a bee, they're hard workers, and they can deliver a powerful sting. And so Deborah is a hard worker. She's a wife, she's a prophet, she's a judge, and she's about to deliver a powerful sting with the Israelite army to Sisera. At this point in time, we can say that Deborah right now is the queen bee, not Beyonce, but the one who oversees the work that Barak and his men are going to do. So off they go to Naphtali and Zebulun are pulled together, and they go off to do as the Lord has commanded. But we're told there's a little twist to the story. Heber the Kenite, who formerly had an alliance with Israel in the days of Moses, has switched sides. He's on the side of Sisera and his army now. And so Heber plays informant and warns Sisera that Barak is on his way up to Mount Tabor with his army, with his troops. And in response, Sisera gathers together a most formidable army, complete with 900 chariots fitted with iron. Now, chariots were the tanks of the day, so he had some stuff going on. So Deborah gives Barak the green light to move forward. And once again, we see she gives the glory to God. She says in verse 14, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? It is God that goes ahead of him, not Deborah herself, to rout Sisera's army. So they're in the middle of the battle, and Sisera sees things aren't going so well. So he decides that desperate times require desperate measures, and he jumps out of his chariot and flees. And where does he end up? At the doorstep of Jael, Heber's wife. He probably felt, okay, we're good. I know where I am. I know where to go. And Jael, Heber's wife, obviously recognizes him. She goes out to greet him. And maybe, Sisera and Heber have hung out, had some wine together, or just best buds. So he feels very comfortable. He was comfortable accepting her invitation because her husband was in alliance with Sisera's forces. But also in the ancient Near East, men were not allowed to go into a woman's tent unless you were her father or her husband. So he knew if anybody came along, they were not going to go and look for him in her tent. So he probably thinks, I've outsmarted Israel's God. I've got it made. I'm just going to stay here a little while, get refreshed, catch some Z's, then I'll be on my way. Sisera asked her for some water, but Jael, whose name means mountain goat, probably gave him, most likely, goat's milk. Lure him into a false sense of security. And we all know that warm milk can sedate and cause sleep. And one of the characteristics of mountain goats is that they are sure-footed and able to navigate rough terrain. And Jael was in a rough situation, but she navigated through it very, very nicely. Unlike her husband, Jael remained faithful to her God in the original alliance that they had in the days of Moses. So she undid her husband's deliberate breach of faith. She decided to get the job done, to finish the Lord's work. Notice there's no hesitation as she picks up the tent peg and the hammer, proceeds to go into the tent and drive the peg through his temple, killing him while he slept. She didn't wait for Barak to show up. She didn't wait for Lapidoth to come and tell her what to do. She saw the opportunity that God had opened up, and she stepped into it and took advantage and obeyed the Lord. Now, Jael's assassination would have been considered a sacrilege and a horrible crime in the day, because her family was at peace with Jabin, the king of Canaan, and Jael had invited Sisera into her home and violated the rules of hospitality by doing violence to him under her tent. But sometimes when the rules say you can't, God says you can. God says you must, because we need to obey the Lord, and we are called to do something for him and not be concerned about what people are thinking or saying or doing, but be obedient to the Lord's will. Jael's attitude was similar to that of David when he defeated Goliath. Now, Sisera had a powerful army, and Barak was afraid of him, just like Israel was afraid of Goliath when they went up against him. But David defeated Goliath with simple implements that he was familiar with, a slingshot and some smooth stones. And likewise, Jael used implements that she was familiar with to get the job done. For in those days, typically women were the ones who pitched the tents for the camp. And so Barak shows up to face the reality of Deborah's prophecy that God has delivered Sisera into the hands of a woman. And upon his death, the kingdom of Jabin was no longer a threat to the Israelites. Israel had been saved by the faithfulness and the courage of a bee and a mountain goat. An unlikely pair that God brought together to accomplish his will. And so the passage itself concludes with emphasizing that it's by the power of God, not Deborah or Jael directly, that subdued Jabin, the king of Canaan. And ultimately, Jabin was destroyed as God worked through these two women and the Israelites' army to accomplish his purposes. And the victory is followed in chapter 5 by a song of rejoicing and praise for what God has done. So instead of getting all crazy and focused on the fact that Deborah was a woman and she's leading this army of men, we need to refocus on the fact that God raised her up to be a woman of influence to those who are supposed to be living for him. And likewise, God has raised up Donnamarie Brown to be a woman of influence to help others to live for him. She found herself at the Salvation Army, an unlikely place, she thought, for a new ministry to be birthed, with some unlikely disciples, men and women whose poor choices had led them down a path of sin and destruction and desperation. But without God's help, they were struggling. And so in their hearts, they cried out to the Lord, and God raised up a leader, Donnamarie Brown. Amen. Now, Donnamarie's story shares a lot in common. All right, you can give God the glory. Come on now. Donnamarie's story shares a lot in common with Deborah. Like Deborah, Donnamarie is a wife, she's a mother, and she has been actively leading in ministry for some time. She's no superwoman, but I had the privilege of listening to her life map, her life story that she presented to some of her colleagues. And I can assure you, after listening to that story, God's hand has been on Donnamarie's life. Amen. Her personality, like that of Deborah, draws people together and commands respect. Donnamarie and Deborah demonstrate the true wisdom of a good leader. They know how to get the job done, whether they are working by themselves or in cooperation with others. They are able to see the big picture and cast a vision that often escapes those who are directly involved in the situation. So they make good mediators, good advisors, good planners. Not only do Donnamarie and Deborah possess wonderful leadership skills, they have a wonderful relationship with their God.
Amen.
The insight and confidence that God gave Deborah placed her in a unique position in the Old Testament and lifted her up as one of the true biblical historical figures. And likewise, Donnamarie is carving out her position in life by God's grace. Both Donnamarie and Deborah's stories show that they are not power hungry, but they are servants. They want to serve their God. Whenever praise comes their way, they give God the glory. Neither woman denied or resisted their position as a woman and a wife, but they never allowed it to hinder them from the work that God was calling them to do. Both women's stories remind us that regardless of gender, God can accomplish great things for those who are willing to be led by Him. So it is quite fitting that God should raise up Donnamarie to minister through Life Renewal Community Fellowship, to assist men and women to become all they can be and to do what God has called them to do. And the name of the ministry echoes what Deborah was seeking to accomplish with Israel and what Donnamarie is seeking to accomplish in this new ministry. Allow me to break it down. Life. Deborah sought to bring back life to Israel after oppression. Donnamarie seeks to bring back life into hearts and souls of people oppressed and whose lives are broken. Renewal. Deborah sought to renew the covenant relationship between Israel and her God. Donnamarie is seeking to help lives be spiritually renewed through a relationship with God. Community. Deborah sought to bring Israel back into a family relationship. And Donnamarie is seeking to help establish a community, a family, where people can come together, be encouraged, pray for one another, and become all that God calls them to be. And finally, fellowship. Deborah sought to unite Israel in one heart and mind, and Donnamarie is seeking to unite people in one heart and mind under the lordship of Jesus Christ. Amen. Those who lead do not forget about the spiritual condition of those being led. Not at all. They are concerned about persons, not just success. So we are challenged by Deborah and Donnamarie's life. They remind us of the need to be both available to God and others, echoing the two greatest commandments, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. They encourage us to spend our efforts on what we can do and not be focused on what we can't do. And they challenge us not to let our prejudices get in the way of those God may have called and raised up into leadership. They finally challenge us to be wise leaders and demonstrate what a person can accomplish when God is in control. So Donnamarie, my sister, I wish you God's richest blessings as you step out for the kingdom of God, as you step out to help others to know Him, to serve Him, and to love Him, and as you step out to get the job done. Amen.